the best of the week on Relevant Radio.
The issues that matter most, right here. The Drew Mariani Show
on Relevant Radio.
My first impression of the Shroud, then, is that, on the face of it, it would make sense to dismiss it as medieval forgery. But as I'm about to discover, there is more, a great deal more to this cloth than meets the eye.
The Drew Mariani Show on Relevant Radio.
Yeah, it's a mysterious garment. There's nothing else like it. And many believe, and the more research you do, that it is indeed the burial cloth of Jesus Christ. I don't think there's anything else on our planet from the period of antiquity that is studied as much as the Shroud of Turin. I mean, you think about the medical examinations that this has gone through. Greek pottery, sculpture, ancient cuneiform tablets, King Tut's tomb, whatever, you can name it, right? It does not compare to what the Shroud has been through. And none of it is as controversial. I mean, for centuries, the faithful have venerated this linen cloth. It's the Shroud, if you're not familiar with it, is a piece of cloth that wrapped the body of Christ after he was scourged and crucified and died. The church's position on it, well, they really don't have an official statement on it, although countless popes, of course, have held it in high esteem, and they've visited the Cathedral of St. John the Baptist in Turin, where the Shroud is held. I don't know whether we'll ever be able to definitively say that this is the burial cloth of Christ. I don't know. I can't say that because you never know, right? But scientific study on the Shroud's continuing to go on, and it first became of interest in the mid-1800s, and there was a fascinating invention when it was photographed. And they took a look at the positive images, and they turned out to be negatives. And it gave you a totally different look at what the Shroud was all about. And then more studies have been done on it. And they found that the image was made by what they think is light was somehow inflected into this, but it's like it looks like scorch marks that barely penetrate the surface of the fibers. Blood on the image was found to be human blood. It's type AB positive, the same blood type that we often see in Eucharistic miracles. There's pollen on the Shroud that comes from the area of Judea and where Jesus lived. It dates to the time when Jesus was alive. There's so much more. I mean, that's just some of the broad brush stuff there. So I've invited today a physician who specializes in internal and occupational medicine and public health. His name's Dr. Gilbert Lavoie. He's spent 40 years studying the Shroud, and his latest book is out now from Sophia Press. You can check it out. It's called The Shroud of Jesus and the Sign John Ingeniously Concealed. Doctor, it's good to have you with us. Good afternoon.
Well, Drew, it's great to be with you.
Your study of the Shroud, let's talk about that. You first studied it, if I understand, when you were a young doctor, as you say in your book, and you approached it skeptically. You were a skeptic of the Shroud and maybe even of faith in general. Bring us back in time. Share a little bit of your story, if you could.
Sure. I actually, the first time I ever heard about the Shroud, I was in pre-med at Boston College, and I was down in Boston in an old bookstore, and I picked up this book called The Doctor at Calvary by Dr. Pierre Barbet, a French surgeon, and I thought it was simply a story with regard to his thoughts about the crucifixion. But no, I found out about this cloth, the Shroud of Turin, which I had never heard about before, and I was fascinated by it. I read the book, and then I put it on my shelf, and I really sort of forgot about it for about 17 years. And the next time I thought about it was I was just starting in the practice of medicine in Boston, opened up the Boston Globe one Sunday, and there on the front page was a picture of the Shroud of Turin. And that they were going to, this was 1978, that they were going to show it in 1978 in Turin. And I called over to my wife and I said, how about it? Let's go to Turin. I'd like to go back and take a look at this. I read about this, when I was young. So that's what we did. We went there. I saw it. I was very, very fortunate. I met a wonderful priest who introduced me to the people that were actually doing some studies on the Shroud at the time. Was the STIRP group. It was a group of scientists that were there doing some work, and I got to meet with them. I had an opportunity to actually take photographs of the Shroud, and then I went to a scientific symposium and then took my own pictures. And I came back, but I have to say that I still was skeptical, and I just wasn't quite sure. I said, well, what is this really? Fortunately, I had my own faith, and so I didn't need the Shroud or anything else. to have me come to understand that Jesus is the Son of God. So I was very skeptical, and there was a blood mark that was off the left elbow that was fascinating, and I asked everybody about it, and no one seemed to know why it got there. So I looked at it. It took me a couple of years, and then one day, I was fortunate. I had a friend of mine who had purchased the full-size shroud, a copy of it, of course. It was black and white, and so one day I decided to put that over myself, and I saw how this all landed on my body, and then I realized what this blood mark really showed. It showed that definitely there was a crucified man in this cloth. It also showed, because of the cloth, it drapes around the body, it showed that there was actually a three-dimensional man. He was also, the other things didn't show that. The other blood marks show height and width, but this shows depth, the third dimension depth. Definitely a three-dimensional man. Also, it showed that the blood marks are simply a contact process, and the image is not a contact process, because if it were, where the clot comes around, when he was in the crucified position, the blood came down the arm and then went around the elbow to the back of the arm. The arm was sort of perpendicular to the cross and just dripped from his arm. We know that he was crucified, and we know that the image itself is not caused by simply perspiration, etc., that would have been on the body. It's not a contact process at all. In fact, we don't know even today what caused that image.
Yeah, there's a theory that there was a huge release of energy. Is that the concept? I have spoken to other experts who talk about.
Right, there is. There's been a number of people that have done that work actually in the Shroud of Jesus in my book. I have references and so forth to those hypotheses, but they still remain hypotheses, and none of them have been proven, and no one has ever reproduced the shroud at the microscopic level.
How do you think the image was inflected onto this garment? There's no technology today to print on a fabric that way. The image is not a stain. It's not painted on the shroud. It's not burned in a conventional way. Instead, it's kind of a scorched image. The production technology can't be really explained. What are your thoughts on it? What do you think happened at the moment of the resurrection?
There is good information from the point of view of high-density UV light can cause the cloth to actually, you literally can see the same color and so forth of the cloth itself because of the UV light. But that's true. We've always known that light, heat, or acid can, cause it to be yellowed. Basically, fibers that are they're about 10 microns in diameter, and they're way less than the hairs on your head. And they only go down into the cloth 1 or 2 fibers deep. And absolutely no one has been able to reproduce the whole. They can reproduce yellowing of the cloth, but
right.
They can't reproduce the image as you see it. No,
that's wild. My understanding also is that it has 3D capabilities, that the image of a man on the cover could be read by 3D technology.
They had way back, John Jackson did that very nice work. They used what I call a VP8 image analyzer. Yeah. In the smaller portions of the body, face and so forth, and hands and whatever, you can see some three-dimensionality. It's a little more difficult over flatter areas and so forth, because it's really showing the difference between dark and light, and you get that 3D image from that. Between this cloth, it has photographic. The best thing to study the cloth is actually the photograph. VP8 is wonderful because it gives you a sort of an idea that it's three-dimensional, but the photograph itself, what you see is what you've got. And I spent a lot of time, doing work with looking at the blood marks and looking at the anatomy of the body. That's where I spent much of my career doing that.
That's fascinating.
And the book has about 80 photographs in it. And what I say about the shroud, you can see for yourself. Yeah. I mean, it isn't, I don't just say something, you can see it and you can decide for yourself whether it's really the Shroud of Jesus or not.
Another mystery that often comes up with the garment is, how did it survive, doctors? It's almost like the tilma, another one of these images that defy scientific explanation, and that was made out of cactus fiber. It should have decayed in about 40 years, experts say. The Shroud of Turin, of Jesus' burial cloth, if it is indeed that, it has survived centuries. We're talking millennia here.
It's fascinating because that's one of the first questions I had when I sort of studied the shroud. Way back when I was in Italy, I went to an Egyptian museum there because they said, how can cloth last this long, 2,000 years? I found indeed that cloth can last not only 2,000 but 3,000 years. I saw shirts, beautiful shirts that are absolutely in great condition, almost 3,000 years old in that museum. So linen, it's flax, is the linen, and if it's kept dry, it can last thousands of years. So that's not the problem. It isn't like tilma and so forth. It doesn't have the flax really can hang in there. Right. The fact that it actually went through a fire, that fortunately, that was in 1532. Yeah. The shroud was in a silver box, and it was in Chamonix, France. There's a little niche in behind the altar. I've seen that niche. Yeah. And the fire started, and 3 men went in there and had threw water over that, and I don't know how they managed, but they brought that out of there because it was hot enough to melt silver, and silver went down into the folded cloth, and then we have these parallel brown marks and patches, along the sides of the image. Then there was another fire in 1997-98 in Turin, and the firemen went in there, and I probably have heard the story of the firemen that had to go in and with a sledgehammer and break the glass bulletproof box to take it out.
Yeah, it was hidden in walls. It was taken out for public veneration. I mean, it's been handled. I'm surprised at how this thing has really, passed that test of time. But I think God has a special anointing on it as well. And Doctor, your book is available, I'm assuming, at all major bookstores. I know it's the best way to get it.
Absolutely. It can be found everywhere today.
Well, let's you and I catch up again. I know we're just beginning to drill into this. There's so much more you can reveal. Thank you for your work, and thanks for being with me today.
Well, I thank you very much for all you do, and God bless you and all your listeners.
God bless you. That's Dr. Gilbert Lavoie, a physician who studied the shroud for 40 years. Check out his book, The Shroud of Jesus and the Sign John Ingeniously Concealed.